You know what breaks a woman faster than heartbreak? Realizing she had to beg somebody just to be loved. And the saddest part, most women don't even notice when it starts happening. First, his text gets shorter. Then his energy changes. Then suddenly the man who used to move mountains for you can't even make time for a phone call. And instead of stepping back, you start chasing. Now listen carefully, because this might change your life tonight. The moment a man starts losing interest, your job is not to convince him to stay. Your job is to remember who you were before you started shrinking yourself for somebody else's attention. See, too many women think love means fighting harder, calling more, texting more, explaining more, begging more. Love was never supposed to turn you into a detective, a therapist, and a hostage all at once. If a man truly values you, you won't have to force consistency out of him. A grown man makes time for what matters to him, and I know that hurts too. Here, because some of you are holding on to memories instead of reality. You keep replaying the man he used to be. The old him would never ignore me. The old him cared. The old him made me feel special. But let me tell you something painful. Sometimes people change. Sometimes effort fades. And sometimes the hardest truth is realizing you're trying to keep alive a relationship that already left emotionally. That's why chasing never works. Because when you chase somebody who's pulling away, you teach them something dangerous. You teach them that they can give you less and still keep all of you. Read that again in your spirit. The more you abandon yourself trying to keep somebody else, the more you lose your power. And a woman without self-respect becomes emotionally exhausted. Now, don't misunderstand me. This isn't about playing games. This isn't about acting cold. This is about dignity. There comes a moment where every woman has to make a decision. Am I fighting for love, or am? I'm fighting to avoid being alone, because those are two different battles. A lot of women stay in situations where they feel unwanted because they're terrified of starting over. But baby, loneliness inside a relationship hurts far more than being alone in peace. At least when you're alone, your soul can heal. But when you keep begging somebody to choose you every day, that destroys your confidence little by little. And one morning you wake up not even recognizing yourself anymore. That's why, when a man starts pulling away, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop. Stop over-explaining. Stop proving your worth. Stop auditioning for a role you already earned. Because the right person will never require you to convince them that you matter. If this message touched your heart, I need you to stop scrolling for 1 second. Because somebody out there is silently breaking inside, just like you were. And these words might be the thing that saves them before they lose themselves completely. See, a high-value woman understands something most people never learn. Rejection is protection. Sometimes God removes people because your heart was getting too attached to somebody who was no longer aligned with your future. But instead of accepting that, you chase harder. You call it love. Sometimes it's fear. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of not being enough. Fear that if this person leaves, nobody else will love you again. That's the real battle. And until you heal that, you will continue accepting crumbs just because you're starving emotionally. Listen to me carefully. Your value does not decrease because somebody failed to appreciate you. A diamond does not become worthless because somebody walked past it. And the strongest thing a woman can do is walk away with grace when she realizes her love is being taken for granted. Not screaming, not begging, not revenge, just peace. Because silence has power. When you stop chasing, you force people to confront the absence of your energy. And sometimes that's when they finally realize what they lost. But even if they don't, you still win, because now you're finally returning to yourself. And let me tell you something beautiful. The woman who chooses herself becomes unstoppable. She glows differently. She walks differently. She stops needing validation from people who are confused about her worth. And eventually, life rewards that woman, not because she begged for love, but because she finally understood she deserved it naturally. So if he's losing interest, don't lose yourself trying to keep him. Lose the attachment. Lose the fear. Lose the habit of settling for half love. And watch how your entire life begins to change. The moment a man starts pulling away, most women make the same mistake. They panic. And panic makes people do things they normally would never do. Suddenly you're checking your phone every 5 minutes. You're rereading old messages trying to figure out what changed. You're replaying conversations in your head at 2 a.m. asking yourself, did I say something wrong? Did I love too hard? Did I become too available? And before you even realize it, your entire emotional world starts revolving around somebody else's distance. That's the dangerous part. Because the more disconnected he becomes, the harder you start chasing. You text first every time. You try to sound happier than you really are. You ignore the disrespect because you're afraid that speaking up might push him away even more. You start accepting less communication, less effort, less affection, all because you're trying to hold on to the version of him that used to make you feel special. And that's where women lose themselves. See, when a man pulls away, your instinct may tell you to fight harder for the relationship. Society has taught women that if something matters, you never give up on it. So you think persistence is love. You think sacrificing your peace proves loyalty. But there's a difference between fighting for a relationship and begging somebody to behave like they care. A man who truly values your presence does not need constant reminders to treat you properly. And yes, people go through stress. Yes, life gets hard. Nobody expects perfection. But when somebody consistently withdraws effort while you keep overextending yourself emotionally, the relationship slowly becomes one-sided. One person is watering the garden while the other person is standing there watching it die. The painful truth is this: chasing somebody who is emotionally pulling away rarely brings them closer. Most of the time, it pushes them further. Why? Because desperation changes the energy completely. The relationship stops feeling natural. It becomes pressure. It becomes obligation. And people naturally run from what feels emotionally heavy. That's why the strongest move is often the hardest one. Stop chasing, not because you're playing games, not because you want revenge, but because your dignity matters too. Sometimes silence tells you everything words were trying to hide. When you stop forcing conversations, you notice who actually reaches out. When you stop overcompensating, you notice who was benefiting from your emotional labor. When you stop carrying the entire relationship on your back, the truth finally reveals itself. And truth is uncomfortable because many women are not actually in love with the present version of the man. They are attached to memories, attached to potential, attached to who he was in the beginning. But relationships cannot survive on nostalgia. You cannot build a future with somebody based only on who they used to be. That's why chasing becomes addictive. You're constantly trying to get back to the old connection. You think if you love harder, support harder, sacrifice harder, maybe he'll return to how things once felt. But love should not feel like emotional rehabilitation. You should never have to exhaust yourself convincing somebody to appreciate you. And let's talk about self-respect for a moment. Every time you ignore your own needs just to keep somebody comfortable, you send yourself a dangerous message. Their presence matters more than my peace. Over time, that destroys confidence. You begin measuring your worth by how wanted you feel. His delayed text becomes your anxiety. His mood controls your emotions. His attention becomes your source of validation. That is not love. That is emotional dependency, a healthy. Relationship should add peace to your life, not constant confusion. You should not have to decode mixed signals from somebody who claims they care about you. Consistency is not too much to ask for. Effort is not too much to ask for. Communication is not too much to ask for. And if somebody makes you feel guilty for needing basic emotional security, then you are already settling for less than you deserve. Now, here's the part many women need to hear deeply. If a man is truly losing interest, no amount of chasing can permanently fix it. You cannot force genuine desire. You cannot beg somebody into emotional maturity. You cannot love somebody so hard that they suddenly become ready to value you properly. People only change when they personally decide to. That's why your power returns the moment you stop abandoning yourself. Instead of chasing him, chase your healing. Chase your confidence. Chase the version of yourself that existed before anxiety took over your heart. Pour energy back into your goals, your growth, your spirit, your peace. Because the woman who reconnects with herself becomes magnetic again. And sometimes when you stop chasing, one of two things happens. Either he realizes your value and steps up with genuine effort, or you finally realize you were fighting to save a relationship that was already emotionally gone. Both outcomes set you free. Because at the end of the day, love should never require you to lose yourself just to keep somebody else. A woman's value does not disappear the moment a man stops recognizing it. But sadly, many women start questioning their worth the second a man changes his behavior. The calls become shorter. The compliments disappear. The effort fades. And suddenly the woman who once felt beautiful, confident, and loved begins looking in the mirror, wondering, what's wrong with me? That question right there has broken millions of hearts, because when a woman starts tying her value to male attention, she slowly loses connection with herself. She starts believing she must earn love by overgiving, over-explaining, over-sacrificing, and over-tolerating. She thinks if she can just become better, he'll finally return to the man he was in the beginning. But listen carefully. A relationship should never require you to abandon your dignity just to feel chosen. The moment a woman starts begging for attention, chasing validation, and accepting emotional crumbs, something painful happens inside her spirit. She may still look strong on the outside, but internally her confidence starts collapsing little by little. Because deep down, nobody wants pity love. Nobody wants forced affection. Nobody wants to wonder if the person beside them truly wants to be there. And yet so many women stay trapped in this cycle because they fear losing the relationship more than they fear losing themselves. That fear is powerful. It makes you text somebody who ignored you all day. It makes you apologize for expressing your needs. It makes you stay quiet about disrespect because you don't want conflict. It makes you accept inconsistency while pretending you're understanding. But there's a dangerous price attached to constantly begging for emotional reassurance. You start teaching people that your standards can be lowered. And once somebody realizes you will tolerate almost anything just to keep them around, the relationship becomes unbalanced. One person keeps sacrificing, the other keeps taking. That's why self-respect matters so much in love. A woman with self-respect understands something important. Attention is not the same as love. Just because somebody texts you occasionally doesn't mean they value you deeply. Just because somebody comes back when they feel lonely doesn't mean they are emotionally committed. Some people only return because they miss access, not because they truly appreciate your heart. And women who don't recognize their value become easy targets for emotionally unavailable people. See, when you constantly seek validation from somebody pulling away, you unconsciously place them above yourself. Their mood controls your peace. Their silence controls your emotions. Their inconsistency becomes the center of your mental world. That is exhausting. You wake up anxious. You sleep overthinking. You start losing focus in your daily life because emotionally you are constantly waiting for somebody to choose you again. And the saddest part, the more desperate energy you give off, the less attractive you often become, because confidence attracts, neediness drains. Now let's be honest about something people rarely admit. Sometimes women beg for attention not because they're weak, but because they're wounded. Maybe they grew up feeling emotionally unseen. Maybe they experienced abandonment before. Maybe they learned to associate love with inconsistency. So now when somebody pulls away, it activates panic inside them. They don't just fear losing a relationship, they fear reliving old pain. That's why healing matters, because unhealed wounds will make you fight for people who are barely fighting for you. You start confusing emotional struggle with emotional depth. You think suffering proves love is real. But healthy love is not built on confusion, anxiety, and constant emotional survival. Healthy love feels safe, not perfect, not fantasy, but safe. You shouldn't feel like you're competing for basic effort in a relationship. You shouldn't have to shrink your standards just to avoid being abandoned. And you should never feel guilty for wanting consistency from somebody who claims they care about you. A high-value woman understands that her worth is established long before a man enters her life. She knows her beauty is deeper than appearance. Her value is deeper than relationship status. And her peace is more important than temporary validation. That's why she doesn't beg. Not because she lacks emotion. Not because she doesn't care. But because she understands this truth. The right love will never require her to lose her self-respect just to keep somebody interested. And let me tell you something powerful. When a woman finally stops begging for attention, something shifts inside her. She stops chasing people who give mixed signals. She stops over-explaining her worth. She stops tolerating behavior that drains her spirit. And suddenly she becomes stronger. Her energy changes. Her confidence returns. Her presence becomes powerful because it's no longer built on desperation. That's when people notice her differently. Not because she became colder, but because she finally remembered her value. And the truth is, the moment you realize your worth is not dependent on somebody else's consistency, you become emotionally free. You stop fearing rejection so much. You stop trying to force connections that no longer flow naturally. And you finally understand that losing somebody who cannot appreciate you properly is not a loss, it's protection. Because the worst heartbreak is not somebody leaving you. The worst heartbreak is abandoning yourself while trying to make somebody stay. One of the hardest truths about relationships is this: people can lie with words, but behavior always tells the truth. That's why silence is so powerful. When a man starts losing interest, many women become louder emotionally. They talk more, explain more, question more, and beg more because they are trying to force clarity out of confusion. They think if they can just get one honest conversation, everything will make sense again. But sometimes the answer has already been given, not through words, but through silence. A delayed response can say a lot. A lack of effort can say a lot. Emotional distance can say a lot. And the painful part is, deep down, most people already feel the truth before they fully accept it. You notice the energy changing. You notice the excitement fading. You notice the conversations becoming dry and forced. But because the heart fears loss, the mind starts making excuses. He's probably just busy. He's stressed right now. Maybe I'm overthinking. And yes, sometimes people genuinely go through difficult seasons. Real relationships require patience and understanding. But there's a difference between temporary stress and consistent emotional withdrawal. One feels human. The other feels like slow abandonment. The problem is that many women are terrified of silence because silence removes distraction. Silence forces you to confront what you've been avoiding emotionally. When the calls stop, when the affection fades, when the effort disappears, there are no more comforting illusions left to hide behind. And that truth hurts, because silence exposes imbalance faster than arguments ever could. When you stop texting first, you discover who actually wants conversation. When you stop planning everything, you discover who values spending time with you. When you stop overcompensating emotionally, you discover who was benefiting from your constant effort. That's why silence is not weakness. Silence is revelation. See, desperate energy often keeps unhealthy relationships alive artificially. One person keeps carrying the emotional weight while the other slowly checks out mentally. But the moment the chasing stops, reality surfaces quickly. And reality can be uncomfortable. Sometimes you realize you were fighting alone. That's why many people avoid silence at all costs. They would rather continue exhausting themselves emotionally than face the possibility that the relationship is no longer mutual. But let me tell you something powerful. Closure does not always come through a conversation. Sometimes closure comes through patterns, through inconsistency, through emotional absence. The realizing that somebody who truly values you should not require endless reminders to treat you with care. And the mature thing to understand is this: you cannot force emotional availability out of somebody who is mentally disconnected already. No amount of overloving changes somebody who no longer wants to invest emotionally. That's why silence becomes necessary, not to manipulate, not to teach them a lesson, but to protect your peace and reconnect with your own clarity. Because when emotions are loud, judgment becomes weak. You start ignoring red flags. You start accepting breadcrumbs. You start romanticizing bare minimum efforts simply because you fear losing the connection completely. But silence clears emotional fog. It gives you space to think without constantly reacting. And sometimes in that silence, you finally hear your own intuition again. You realize how exhausted you've become. You realize how much anxiety the relationship has created. You realize how often you've abandoned your own needs trying to maintain somebody else's attention. That awareness is painful, but it is also freeing, because you cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. Now here's another truth many women need to hear. If your absence changes nothing for somebody, your presence was never being valued properly to begin with. That hurts, but it's important. A person who truly loves you notices your silence. They notice your emotional withdrawal. They care when your energy changes. They don't comfortably watch you drift away without concern. Effort reveals priorities, always. And when somebody repeatedly shows you emotional inconsistency, believe the behavior instead of clinging to potential. Too many women fall in love with possibility instead of reality. They keep hoping the man will become emotionally available again if they just stay patient long enough. But hope without evidence becomes emotional self-destruction. At some point, wisdom requires acceptance. Acceptance that not every connection is meant to last. Acceptance that some people are only temporary chapters. Acceptance that love cannot survive where effort disappears consistently. And silence often helps you reach that acceptance faster than chaos ever could. Because arguments can be misleading. Words spoken in emotion can confuse things. But consistent behavior over time rarely lies. That's why emotionally mature women stop obsessing over promises and start paying attention to patterns. Anybody can say, I love you, but consistency proves it. Effort proves it. Presence proves it. And if those things disappear while excuses increase, silence may already be giving you the answer you've been afraid to hear. The strongest thing you can do in that moment is not chase harder. It's to listen. Listen to the silence. Listen to the distance. Listen to your intuition. Because sometimes silence is not empty. Sometimes silence is the truth finally speaking.